2025, 19 suicides, and 10 of them were at our facility. Every single one of them tested positive for one or more substances. Our guys on suicide watch are actively doing drugs that are being trafficked to them while they're on suicide watch.
The chaos exists, and it's not just some organic development. It is a feature of the system there, not a bug. It's a way of camouflaging discrete action.
It took him 3 minutes to do what he did, and he was gone by the time anybody noticed. And there's proof of that, given that 2 of the suicides happened with... Welcome to Injustice Speaks Project, our new podcast. This is our first episode, The Witness, and we will say hello to our producer, Dylan, as well. Hi, Dylan.
Hi, Dylan Butterfield.
I am Lori Utesch.
I'm Eric Jimenez.
Welcome. We are so glad for anybody and everybody who is listening. Let's get started.
So, Lori, you've had an interesting 6 months, right?
To say the least, yes.
How did we get here? How did it start?
Oh, gosh. Okay, well, that's a much longer story. How I got here, where we are now, and doing this type of advocacy work started with, like you said, the last 6 months, working at a maximum security prison, where things were not as they should have been. I think I knew it the second I walked in the door. But I have a lot of correctional background working in my field as a therapist, a mental health therapist.
Why don't we let's start there. Let's go back. What made you interested in working with the prison population and why corrections? Because
in my mind, it's the extreme. I don't want to work with just one population with one disorder. I don't want to focus all on one issue. When you go into the correctional population, you are getting anything and everything you could possibly imagine in terms of disorders, in terms of trauma history, childhood trauma, anything you could possibly imagine, drug addiction. It's all there. And so I lean toward the extreme. And so I knew when I started undergrad, I was the only one that would stand up in my classes during the icebreaker things, at the beginning of every semester. What degree are you getting and what are you going to do with your degree?
Where are you from?
Where are you from? What do you plan to do? And the funny thing is I never planned on becoming a therapist. So
name one thing no one ever knows about you.
Give us one fun fact. I'm the least fun fact person out there. So
I hate icebreakers.
It's the most uncomfortable and the worst. I think I used the same fun fact about myself all the way from undergrad all the way up through grad school. And
what was that?
That I have a phobia with blue Christmas lights. I'm terrified of them. That was the one I used every time. That was it.
I think we have to explore that in order to establish your credibility.
Maybe in a later episode we can go down that.
What is it about the Christmas lights?
They're terrifying to me. I don't know. And you know what? And it's not been my whole life either. It started like sometime when I was in my 30s.
A deep trauma related to blue Christmas lights.
Oh God, I have a visceral reaction. Those people that decorate their homes all in blue during the holidays, it makes me want to throw up. No offense to anybody who does that. It's just I have a visceral response. So I was always the one that would stand up and say, I want to work in prisons. I want to work with inmates. I want to work with, in a correctional environment. And I was just always very sure about that.
That strikes a chord with me because that's exactly the same reason why I was interested in it. Over 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Counseling programs are typically in schools or colleges of education. Mm-hmm. So all of the practicum and internship opportunities were all school-based, right? Yeah. So if you wanted to do a practicum somewhere, the first suggestion was always this middle school, this high school, this elementary school. And I really detested the idea of having to do counseling for, kids stressed out about ISTEP or whatever.
Right.
And so there were no arrangements for an internship or a practicum with the DOC at Ball State University at the time. And so I had to do all that legwork to get that established and make sure that it would be KCREP approved. And so I dived into that for the same reasons that you did, for the added level of pathological experience, mm-hmm. right? Because otherwise you're not going to see things. And I do think it helped in terms of exposure and testing my mettle and giving me experiences that increased my knowledge base. It also increases my level of compassion for inmate populations, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, you mentioned internships. When I was, getting toward the end, or that time where internship was coming into play during undergrad, and they have this manual that you can go through, looking at all the internship sites that are already in place, and you can choose from all of these and interview with them and apply. And none of them, there was nothing in there that even remotely interested me, and I was getting very frustrated. And I was talking to my professors about it, and I'm like, I don't want to go do an internship because I need an internship. I want to do something that's going to be something where I can be helpful, where I can gain knowledge that's going to be helpful to me in the future. And so it was about 2 weeks after the fact, after I told my professors, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do if I can't find one. I got an email from a former professor who worked for the Department of Justice. He said, we're taking interns. Boom, done. He worked for the probation department, the federal probation department. I said, done. And he said, but you don't have any of the maybe classes that we would want to see. I didn't have any JD classes.
Well, forensic psychology is often not part of a standard curriculum.
Right.
Like, you have to pursue that. I remember it being a special seminar that we had to take.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a requirement. And it almost speaks to the level of interest that people have about whether or not inmate populations or criminal populations are even deserving of quality care. If we're not even going to offer education into this area, then why would anybody graduating think that it's a population that's deserving of qualified clinicians and serious care?
Exactly. So I mistakenly said JD classes earlier, but I meant CJ. So no, I had no criminal justice classes under my belt. So I took that semester off, I took that semester, I put internship off, and I took 2 criminal justice classes and then applied for that internship the next semester and got it. So I worked for the Department of Justice in the probation department for that semester. And I got to, interact and shadow the federal marshals. I got to interact and even a little bit with, the victim advocacy department. They don't really let people in there too much, but I did get to talk to them and interact with them. But in the majority of the time I was in court and just kind of seeing, what was going on and what these people were coming in for and what they were doing. And it was mind blowing to me. I learned so much. The people there were amazing. That was an incredible experience. And then I got to do new arrest interviews. They're bringing in guys. There was one, it was a very exciting time for them. There had been a guy that had been on their most wanted list for 2.5, 3 years, and they got him while I was interning, and so I was able to see him. They wouldn't let me interact with him too much. He was kind of angry about getting caught, but I got to see him, and I got to see them bring him in, and they'd been looking for him for so long, and it was just kind of this, just a very team-oriented experience. And so
when it's run right, it can feel like a very team-oriented experience.
Yes,
yeah,
and it absolutely was. And they weren't, and the funny thing is that they, at the time, because you don't go in, especially, you don't go in knowing what to do. You don't go in knowing how, federal anything works. And so they were very patient with me, but then there were times where, they got on me about a lot of stuff, like, all right, this needs to be this way, this needs to be done, this needs to be done. And I appreciated it so much. They offered me training. I did the training for, the post-conviction risk assessment. They call it the PICRA. And I was so serious about it. I was so I have to be good at this. And so just fascinating. And so
it's a good acronym, PICRA.
It's PICRA. Yeah.
It's easy to take serious.
Yeah. One of the officers there called me the PICRA Nazi because I just would not give in. I'm like, you're wrong. That's not you're wrong. And I was just I was so blessed with that. And I'm like, yes, I'm not going to let it go.
I think that's going to be a t-shirt.
It's going to be, we have so many t-shirts coming. And so, so I graduated, and then 11 days before I graduated, I had met with, it wasn't even a formal interview, but one of my professors said, I have a friend who works at this prison. It was a medium security prison. Go talk to her. Go find out if there's something that you can do with just a bachelor's degree. And I went and talked to her. I called her and I said, hey, can I come talk to you about anything? And I was there for probably 3 hours that day. We talked in her office for about an hour and a half. She went and walked me around the prison, and she walked me back to the substance abuse program area, which is, all the way in the back of the facility. And they hired me. They hired me that day it was called Therapeutic Community. And they hired me that day, 11 days before graduation. And I went to work and worked there for 2 years. And that was when I started seeing a very, very broken system.
Let's start off with those early observations. One of the observations that or self-realizations I noticed very early on in my own career in the DOC was just this idea that there's a desk between us, but there's not really a lot of distance between us.
Right.
That basically these are people who simply got caught for the exact same activity that oftentimes I had engaged in or was very near to me or close to my life. Like, it wasn't a great psychological distance to be on the other side of that desk. And I think once you have that experience, it's then easy to start to humanize them as a population and to really recognize that these are people deserving of rights and also our understanding of corrections, period. Like, why is a person sent to prison, right? And I think this often leads to the creation of two different kinds of people who go into the prison system to work. There's those who understand that the sentence or the punishment is that they are sentenced to a facility that they cannot leave on their own volition. That is the sentence, that is the punishment. And then there is another batch of people, another batch of staff who honestly believe that a person's punishment is really they're sentenced to a facility to be treated inhumanely.
Correct.
Right? And so I was on the other side of that where I believed they're just here and they can't leave. That is the punishment. It's not my job to be mean to them or cruel to them. And so I'm wondering if you started to have those same kinds of observations early in your career.
Of course, my first observations were that of staff. And so staff are just as leery as new people coming in as the incarcerated individuals are. They're checking you out. They're kind of holding back and seeing what you're all about. And I always thought that was kind of interesting. And they will test you just as much as the inmates will. And so with that first experience being actually in a prison where I had dreamed of being for so long, working inside the prison and being able to interact with them, there was so much more going on than you can ever possibly expect. You would never know what to expect. There's no possible way that you can fathom that. And so I knew going in that I was going to have to, at least with the inmates, I was going to have to earn their respect. I was going to have to earn their trust, their respect. Any interactions with them was not going to come just because I'm there and because I have a badge on, whatever. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. They were especially leery because I'm a white woman, they don't even know where. They don't trust me. They don't know what I'm doing there. They don't trust me. And so that first experience, it took about 3 months for them to really just kind of start interacting naturally with me, trying to find out what I was all about. We didn't really do a lot of one-on-one there. We did groups.
What facility was this?
This was Westville Correctional Facility in Westville, Indiana.
And around what time frame are we talking about?
This was back in 2015 to 2017. And also because I didn't have any exposure to general population. I didn't have any exposure to, I worked in Therapeutic Community as a substance abuse counselor in training is what they called us. Essentially what was happening is we're gaining clinical hours so then we can take the KDAC and get certified to be, a certified substance abuse counselor. And so first, what I noticed is that very few of the counselors that worked there had any kind of educational background. They did an associate's degree in some random, we had a couple counselors. We had one counselor that had a master's degree. We had, myself and two others had bachelor's degrees. There were associate's degrees. There was, one that had been there for so long, no degree needed, and so it was kind of that, but no, their experience was working in that prison. But
very few people had formalized experience as a mental health clinician.
Mental health. And anytime you're working with addictions, mental health is the all-encompassing, and so my undergrad degree is in, psychology and sociology. And so I had basics. I didn't have nearly enough, but we did groups and we did classes. I created a couple classes while I was there. I wrote out the curriculum and because I tend to kind of sit back and see what they're most in need of. So I created a public speaking class. And the guys were like, I'm not doing that. I said, nobody's forcing you to do anything. I'm not speaking publicly. But then by the time I left, that class had a waiting list because I understand where they're coming from. I understand and so, we did groups.
It's a vague term, but for others who aren't familiar, groups can be a couple of things. Groups can be therapeutic groups, almost like a support group or a specific counseling group, or it can also be sort of like a psychoeducational group where it's more like almost like a class where you're at school, where you're giving a lot of like lectures and information, like PowerPoint presentations, handouts, that kind of stuff, right? And they can often be about all sorts of things that may not necessarily be therapeutic, but they could also be independent living, life skills, that kind of stuff.
It was very much a processing group, very much just, because they were processing stuff that they had been through on the outside, but they're also processing what they're going through inside. But then I think it's just because of the way I operate as a professional, it also very, psychoeducational. So I want to teach them things. And I'm also sharing with them what you mentioned earlier about, there's not much distance between me and them. I was very familiar with a lot of what they had been through and in terms of substance abuse and childhood stuff, whatever. So I related, not necessarily sharing that with them, but you guys got caught. Here we are. I get it. So let's try and work through it. Let's try and keep you out. If you're getting at Westville, majority they're getting out. Yes, there were some that had been there for quite some time, but at Westville they're getting out.
Yeah, and I think that component of this is a population that simply got caught.
Yes.
Like a significant portion of the general population engages in the exact same behavior and simply are lucky. They don't get caught.
Yeah.
If you understand that, if that's the framework with which you go into the prison system, then I think it facilitates having greater levels of empathy. If you go into it believing that the person who is incarcerated must be suffering from some kind of like characterological flaw that makes them somehow bad or evil or subhuman, then I think that kind of funnels you into that other category of employee who thinks now it is my job to punish you with inhumane treatment.
Exactly. And that's very much not the case. When I started there, we had our director, who was just this incredible guy, educated PhD, we could go to him with anything. He had answers. He was very calm. He was very personable, very approachable, amazing. And then we had an assistant director who was just as amazing. She was a very fun, outgoing person, got along with everybody. And then it came to a point where those two were pulled in different directions to different facilities. And so they replaced him with somebody who had a GED and had worked her way up through the ranks of the DOC. She started out as a CO, and now she's the director of this program. And the way she interacted with us as staff and the way she interacted with the inmates, it very much showed how she felt. It wasn't at all uncommon for, us to witness her swearing at them, MFing them, shut the F up kind of, it just was. Oh, I had so much, I could feel their humiliation. I could feel their anger. I could feel their embarrassment. It was horrible. It did nothing for them. They were frustrated. And then of course they come and complain to, their therapists, their counselors. We don't have anything to do about it because if we push back against her, then we're getting the same thing, which actually ended up being the reason that I left. Because she then turned that behavior, she turned that on me because I did push back. And so I had to go because there was no possible way.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into this internal system that happens inside prison systems where, I can't say it's this way for all prisons, but at the Reception Diagnostic Center, which was a really well-run prison, I have to say. I liked my time there. There were two superintendents, right? And so one was over programming, which governed all the psychological stuff and all the different educational things that were offered. And then you had an operations superintendent, and that person controlled and governed all of the custodial, right, kind of stuff. And so you can sort of have this whole separate track of almost like, I guess, internal nepotism or just sort of self-protection where you have people within the custody staff who end up just sort of elevating through the ranks and their behavior sort of goes unchecked, right? And so all of a sudden they can be installed as sort of like a head of a program, and they may not actually be qualified to do that. And so their bad behavior, their abusiveness gets protected because they've been there for a certain amount of time.
Especially when they have a spouse who also works there, who's high up in the ranks.
That'll do it, yeah.
Which was the case as well. And so it just was not a situation where I knew. And at the end of the day, I knew with my bachelor's degree, while it was great and I learned a lot. I learned more inside than I did ever, in the classroom about the population that I wanted to work with. But I didn't have enough education to be dealing with them the way I was dealing with them. I couldn't help them in the way that they needed to be helped, not to the degree that they needed to be helped. And so I ended up leaving there in 2017, and then I went to grad school.
And you got your degree in what?
Grad school, I got my master's in education on the mental health track, which then, took me to becoming a licensed therapist, which is what I am now. And worked, I did my internship at a private practice. I made sure during that, because it was a really great experience, I'm not going to lie. We had, it had some moments, but it was, for me, I wanted to make sure that I was still interacting and doing things with clients that was for me. And so at my internship, I helped to facilitate, there was a group in place for adolescent sexual perpetrators, male adolescent sexual perpetrators. And so I wanted in on that group. I've been advocating for sexual assault victim survivors for years, and my whole life, I guess you could say. And so I wanted in on that group, and I stayed in that group the entire time that I interned there. And then we progressed forward. They also, I took part in trainings, everything. That was a great experience. And then we progressed and we split the groups where, one therapist was working with just the kids. And then I was facilitating the group with their parents and their caretakers, which was what an incredible experience that was, because I got very close with them, and they're coming from such different places, because it's not just mom and dad, not with these kids, it's grandma, mom and dad have either passed away or they got put in the foster care system, so they have all of these different stories. And so I'm working, with some very frustrated parents. I'm working with some caretakers that never, imagined they would be put in the position to be where they're sitting. And so it was an incredible experience to be working with them. And then I left there. After some, all while we're dealing with everybody else's life issues and our clients and our patients, and, our own life is happening. So my own life happened. And so I ended up leaving there not too long after and was off for a while. I took a year off, going through some stuff. And then I tried to go back into private practice. It's just not for me. And then that's when I decided to go back into the prison system. Which I did in 2023. I went back into the prison system at Indiana State Prison. And
what was your initial observation going in?
I think not the same as it was at Westville, because I had some experience, and so I kind of knew how to handle, there were attempts at, maybe a little bit of intimidation,
by who? By
custody staff. It's typically custody staff. Immediately, it's custody staff. I think they're just taught to be, aware of everybody and to, treat everybody like they're about to do something bad. I don't know if that's actually, but that's what it feels like. And so I had experience, and so I just had no, there is no intimidation. And so it had been somewhere that I had wanted to work because it is a maximum security facility. They do have death row there. They just have, it's a much bigger facility than what Westville was. And it's just a much different operation than Westville. It's funny because I think back on my clients at Westville, and they used to call Westville the daycare of prisons. And I'm like, you guys, this is prison. You guys are serving time. And they're like, you don't even know. They're like, this is like the daycare of prisons. This is the easiest time you can do. And it was shocking to me. And then I got to ISP, and it was like, oh, okay, now I know.
You mentioned it has death row there, and that's true, but it also is the only prison that has death row, right? So all inmates that are sentenced to death row go to ISP in Michigan City. And so your observations of the Indiana State Prison was an initial experience of sort of intimidation, almost like social aggression on the part of custodial staff. Did you ever notice aggression towards inmates?
Not right away, because, and especially us, because we're contract staff. Okay, so custody works for DOC. We work for a contract company. They tend to, there's no other way to say it, they tend to behave better when we're around. And so, no, not right away. I didn't see it.
And so just for clarification purposes, just so for those who don't know, the Indiana Department of Corrections outsources their mental health provision to outside contractors.
Correct.
The contract changes hands a few times. This one was Centurion, is that right?
It was.
Okay.
I believe it still is. And so, no, we don't tend to see the violence happening. We see the result of it happening. We see the black eyes and the cuts and the scratches and the scrapes and the bruises, and we see all that. 99% of the time, they won't tell us who did it. So, but
the inmates won't tell you.
The inmates will not tell us. We have to ask. We have to ask questions. We have to report that we witnessed, that they're injured, but they won't say anything.
Well, the fear would be reprisal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in that environment, yes, 100%.
Let's go back. So, again, my experience with DOC is 20 years ago, right? But this problem of aggression that occurs, or neglectful care that occurs on the part of custodial staff towards inmates, has existed a long time. And so after RDC, there was basically a mass firing at the Indiana Boys School, which is next door to the RDC. It's in Plainfield, Indiana. There were 3 prisons there. So it was RDC, the Reception Diagnostic Center, where everybody who's convicted to the DOC goes to for classification for about a 30 to 45-day stay, and then they're shipped out to various prisons based on that classification. So everybody is just operating under the condition that we're just going to treat everybody as if they belong in a maximum security prison for this limited amount of time. And that makes sense, right? Because you have people that will eventually end up in a minimum security prison, and then you'll have other people who are definitely going to go to like ISP, right? Or something like that, right? So I think we did a pretty good job, maintaining that for everybody, and, keeping everybody, sane as they sort of sat in a maximum security prison, even though they knew they really didn't belong in one and would not ultimately be in a maximum security prison. And so next door to RDC is the Plainfield Correctional Facility. And then across the street from that basically is Indiana Boys School, right? And Indiana Boys School no longer exists. At least it doesn't exist there. Maybe they moved it to a different facility. The idea of, housing teenage males in a particular facility. But Indiana Boys School was where they housed Manson, right, when he was a kid. Around the time, 20 years ago, there was an incident at Indiana Boys School where custody staff basically broke this kid's neck. And he was paralyzed from the neck down. His family sued, and they won a big, big settlement, right? So everybody there basically got fired, cleaned house, and then all of a sudden there were these promotional opportunities for people to kind of come in. So I got one of those. That place just had like a specter on it. It was like a black cloud. I was in charge of a conduct disorder unit, and a lot of times the kids there, they would have lice and pubic lice, and so they would have to be shaved, and it was just nasty. There was rodents, mice would be in the units. My office had roaches.
Oh yeah.
And so it was just a rough place, and it was depressing to go to work there. And then the programming was very strange too. Like, I don't really understand what they were doing. I don't think I got along well with my supervisor, but it was his program and this is what he wanted us to do. But there would be this one building that we all had to go to, and there would just be these boxes, these cardboard boxes stretched out across all these long tables. And inside these boxes would be different kinds of handouts, like for different kinds of groups or whatever. And so all the mental health staff, all the clinicians, all the people leading the groups would have to like rifle through these boxes to get these handouts. And then we'd go to our little rooms, right, where we'd have our, class or whatever. And then we'd have to like go through these handouts, right? And at the time, I didn't know this, but, the kids would inform me, like, why am I doing this?
Right.
Like, I've already gone through this 6 times. It just has to be repeated over and over again. I don't understand what the clinical value of that is, just sheer repetition. It was driving them nuts. But if I had any sort of independent thought and wanted to do something different with the group, well, then I would get in trouble for that. So, needless to say, I didn't last very long there. It's an early example of this kind of abusiveness sort of happening, even towards minors. Now you imagine some place like ISP where you have, people there for, serious crimes in need of a maximum security prison, or maybe they've been sentenced to death row, right? So if it's going to happen to, a teenager, what's going to happen towards an adult convicted of a very serious crime?
Well, like it kind of just stood out what you just said about, getting in trouble for utilizing your education and licensure the way it's meant to be utilized. That is the whole theme of what we were experiencing at ISP. And we taught, going in, there's like, the attempted intimidation factor from custody staff. I don't even know if it's anything to call it intimidating. It's just, they're not interacting with you. You can talk to them and they will actively, they're just not interested in whatever it is you have to say until they know you, which if you don't talk to them, you don't really get a chance to get to know them. And so it's like, I don't know you, I'm not talking to you. You can come up and ask me questions about inmates and I'll, I'll answer, but but that's it. Like they kind of let you know, I don't mess with you. You
said that there are cliques, but can you describe these small little enclaves of cliques? Like, who are they comprised of? Is there like a custody clique?
Absolutely.
Is there like a medical clique?
Absolutely. Well, because you come in every morning and you can kind of see, especially, we come in and we go through a shakedown process, which is brutal. It doesn't matter. No matter how you look at it, shakedown was just a mess. It just was a mess. The things that they were doing and was just very redundant and repetitive. And it was not, and I've never been through a shakedown system that worked the way it did at ISP. I've worked at Miami Correctional. I've worked at LaPorte Juvenile. I've worked at Westville, and then ISP. Nothing compared to going through ISP Shakedown. It was the most ridiculous, chaotic situation ever. And so just once you get through those doors, you're just so excited to be out of it. But then you get through into custody hall, and there's always the same group of people sitting in the captain's office, and they're all just, the captains, the lieutenants, whoever, the sergeants. Some officers are hanging out, and they're all just kind of sitting around talking and doing their thing. So you just kind of start to see like who's chatting, who's hanging out, who's whatever. And then, we just make our way back to our building. We get our stab vest, we get our stuff, and we just go back to our building. We didn't really mess around too much in custody hall. And then we just go to work. But I did notice pretty quickly, because again, it was the same situation where I'm going into a department that has this department head that's amazing. She was phenomenal. I think she had been there for 5 years when I got there. She had that department running like a well-oiled machine. She just was phenomenal at what she did. She was very comfortable in her role. She was very knowledgeable. The guys all knew her and loved her for the most part. And so
this is Dr. Chico.
This was Dr. Chico. She was phenomenal. She's phenomenal. I learned very early on that the mental health department was not really recognized as any, useful department. We were just kind of like, the redheaded stepchild of all of the medical and healthcare departments. And so I was told very early on that if you have to interact with, these certain individuals that are, the higher ups, the admin, the HR, all of that stuff, if you have to interact with them, just come to me, let me know about it. I will handle it. I'm not letting them put their stuff on you. And so I learned, within the first couple of weeks, don't mess with them. Let me take care of it. And then, she was only there. I started in September of 2023, and she left at the end of May of 2024. And we had another department head take over.
There are a couple things I just want to touch on before I lose it. But the idea that psychology or counseling or mental health would be sort of like the stepchild that's unwanted, right? I think that kind of goes back even into academia, where like we try to follow this sort of medical model, right? Like we're a real science, we're a real thing.
We are like evidence based. We
follow.
Yeah.
And so, we've been searching for that sort of equivalence, right? That the things of the mind and things of the psychological makeup are the same things as biology and physiology, right? And so I think we've often been sort of treated as sort of like, not really, right?
Right.
And so to have like a separation between mental health and medical, and also maybe custody, who kind of feels that maybe we're interfering with how they operate. So we're a nuisance to them. I think that tracks. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
You also said one more thing. You also said it was chaos going through, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is it about the chaos? Like, what made it chaotic?
Going through Shakedown? It wasn't unusual for there to be a line, almost to the door. Everybody's got their bags, everybody's got their stuff, everybody, like we've got, in the wintertime we had coats and boots and they, and it seemed like maybe once every couple months they would reinforce a rule that they had somehow forgotten about. So all of the bags that are given to us by the DOC, by the way, we get the bags that we are carrying, the clear plastic bags are given to us by the DOC. And then, what we're allowed to have in the bags, what we're allowed to wear, so there was one morning where, I went in and I'd been wearing my Apple Watch almost the entire time I'd worked there. And a lieutenant that had just come back from leave, she had been on leave for months, like she had been gone. Her first day back, she takes my Apple Watch and you're not allowed to have this. And I said, okay, that's weird because you just let 5 other ones go by. They're all standing behind me wearing their Apple Watches. And we ended up, we were like nose to nose screaming. She took it to, internal investigation. She made a copy of it. She did a whole, she made phone calls and she's screaming at me and she's, I'm in her face. She's in my face. And
that's how you got your cast.
And that's, yes. Years later, yes, I still wear the cast from where she injured me. No. But and it was a power trip. That's all there, because there were quite literally coworkers of mine that were standing behind me wearing Apple Watches that she had just let through. But she was going to prove a point that day and she was going to show her ass and whatever. And so I went down to I said, give me my freaking watch back. I'm not, I said, tell her to stay away from me. I'm not dealing with her. I'm not dealing with that kind of nonsense. They gave me my watch back and that was the end of it. She never said another word.
In your prior experiences in different prisons, did you happen to have a similar experience where going through and entering the facility was similarly sort of chaotic?
No, not a single one. In Westville, because Shakedown was such a small, condensed area, it tended to get crowded. But Westville was a lot more thorough in their, they had the dogs. You go through and you get your bags checked and everything else, and then you go into another room and you sit in a chair and let the dogs walk around you and sniff. I think ISP did that 3 times in the years that I was there. The dogs came out to do that maybe 3 times.
And that matches my experience. And when I interned at Pendleton, it was a smooth operation. When I worked at RDC, smooth operation. Even as much as I disliked Indiana Boys School, also a very smooth operation. When Indiana Boys School was changed into the Plainfield Reentry Facility. So it had a makeover, and it was a totally different kind of facility. It was much better run, and it didn't have that black cloud over it either. They did an internship there, and that too was also a very well-organized machine. And my point is that this chaos, right? We're going to get back to that.
Oh, absolutely.
So, just put a pin in the chaos.
Yeah, that chaos plays a big role. Yeah. And so everything was just very, oh gosh, and we walk in, we have to go through the scanner, and it just seems, so any other facility where there's a scanner, and I'll use Miami as the best example, because that's where it kind of came to my attention. You go through the scanner, they've scanned you. They see you don't have anything on you. So if you have to go through the scanner at Miami, you don't have to get patted down. You've already, they've seen your skeleton, for God's sakes. You don't have anything on you. But at ISP, they're like, no, you still have to get patted down. You have to strip down, and you have to take your shoes off, and you have to do all this. And it's like, but I just went through the scanner. You have to do all of it. It doesn't matter and so it just was crazy. They just didn't, there was just no, and then of course we'll get into it later. I won't get into it right now, but we'll, get into it later. But the people checking the bags. Oh my God. We'll get into it, in another.
Yeah. They've seen your skeleton.
Yeah.
They can identify a tumor.
You know how many cavities I have. What do you think I'm hiding right now? So
you have a polyp on your ass, but
we're calling doctors for you right now, but also
take off your shoes.
So it just was, oh God. And it was, and nobody wanted to be there. And so everybody was just argumentative. And it got to the point too, where there were, very, notable situations where, one of my coworkers, she's asthmatic. She had her inhaler that she brings into work every single day. She had been there for 2 years, and she brought it into work one day, and they took it out of her bag. You can't have this. And she's like, I can't breathe. What do you want me to do?
I can't.
She's like, it's been in my bag for 2 years. And so it was a big, and that was a big thing that went on for, a couple days. Her trying to get, she called her doctor and said, I need a note. And even her doctor was like, what are you've had asthma since you were like, so that kind of stuff. Nothing was consistent. There's no consistency. Which is terrifying in that kind of environment.
Shame on her for trafficking air.
Well, honestly, medicated air is what they were mad about. That's what we're talking about here. Medicated air, no. And so it was a big ordeal. If I had to go in with my cast on, I can't even fathom. I can't. Just let your arm be broken. Just take your cast off. We don't need it here. You're going to traffic it. An inmate's going to steal it. That was their big, and it was all nonsense to make it look like they were doing their jobs, which, okay. But getting back to our department, we had what I thought was a very solid department at the time. And then our department head left, and we faced some pretty major changes. And that's when 2025 was the roughest year. We were having 2025 throughout the IDOC, 19 suicides, and 10 of them were at our facility. A lot of them hit we had quite a few that hit our department really hard. And so, we as a department were starting to get together and be like, all right, what are we doing here? We need to, especially after the first couple, we were in charge of the biannual training for what are called Suicide Watch companions, which are other incarcerated individuals that will sit with somebody on Suicide Watch for a 4-hour period of time. Their shifts were 4 hours, and it is their job to watch them and document every 15 minutes whatever their activities are. And so we would take turns, everybody in the department going and doing the training class. It was usually like 1 month. It was a week out of 1 month. And we would all take turns, I'll do Monday, you do Tuesday, whatever. And I told our department head, I love doing that. That's the kind of stuff I love doing. I will teach all of them. And so I started doing that. I started being the one to do all the trainings. That created such an amazing relationship with me and the Suicide Watch companions, and then and just the way that we interacted together. They got to know me, I got to know them. That created an incredible rapport, because then they didn't have any fear coming up to me. They didn't have any fear approaching me, letting me know something that's going on, reporting to me stuff that was happening. And so we were very much then in the know about the stuff that was going on with the guys on Suicide Watch, which herein lies the next biggest issue. Our guys on Suicide Watch are actively doing drugs that are being trafficked to them while they're on Suicide Watch. They're cutting on themselves. All of this stuff where they have staff and they have Suicide Watch companions that are supposed to be keeping an eye on them, and they're doing the most. Mm-hmm. And so we're coming into work every morning, and the first thing that we do is to check in with our guys on Suicide Watch. And so to come in and knowing that we did the orders, sent out the orders to 60 plus people, higher ups, admin, other departments, whatever, 60 plus people on this email. Here's our orders. Here's what's allowed. Here's what's not. And we go in and they've got all the things. They've got things they're not supposed to have. We find out that they've been cutting on themselves. They're high. They're agitated. They're angry. And so we have no idea what is going on.
And this is in 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that reputation for, one, just sort of inhumane conditions,
mm-hmm.
Mistreatment of inmates, and also, abuses from the staff, but also major contraband being trafficked through that facility.
Oh, so bad.
Basically corruption.
So bad.
Right. That had been the reputation 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no different now.
It's no different now. Even, my patients, because we did groups as well. In addition to one-on-one therapy, we did groups. And my guys in my groups would tell me, Miss Utesch, it's funny because it kind of struck when they would tell me, it would echo what you have told me several times, that 20-year mark, because they would tell me 20 years ago, it was not like this. 20 years ago, it was not, this prison did not run this way. And, I talked to them about it. What was different 20 years ago? 20 years ago, the inmates had more of a say. I mean, I'm not going to lie. They, a lot of them told me, they're like, well, 20 years ago, the gangs were running it, but they ran it better than admin. They kept everybody in line. They kept everybody, nobody wanted to mess with them. Everyone's like, no, thanks, but like the gangs were running it. And they kept everybody straight, and they kept not that there weren't things that happened, but it just wasn't this. And the drugs, there's enough drugs in ISP for 2,000 plus inmates to maintain daily drug habits.
Yeah, and these theories that family members or friends are flying drones over to you don't get that much drugs with a flying drone. Like, that's ridiculous.
No, and it's not, the drones are flying. The drones are definitely flying, but they're dropping rolling papers. They're dropping tobacco. They're dropping, they're dropping meth, and they'll drop weed. They'll drop, whatever. So there was one, I think they dropped like, there were like cigar, like, I don't know if they were actual like blunts, or if they were the cigars, so they could take the, like they could smoke the cigars, whatever, if they were going to take the paper off of them. But like, there's a plethora of, items inside these packages that they're dropping. But the drones are not.
They can't possibly.
The majority of the cell phones, the meth, the heroin, the K2.
Right.
Every once in a while, we would get cocaine. The really fun times came when they would get a batch of ecstasy. I will never forget the one night I came in one morning, and the little night nurse, and she was the most precious little angel. There was a guy that was on an intox hold, and she's like, he keeps trying to hug me. He was so high on, she's like, he was so high on ecstasy, and she's like, so he kept asking for water. She's like, I'd go give him water, and she's like, then he would ask for a hug, and she's like, I'd tell him 50 times, I'm not giving you a hug.
And we can come up with all kinds of ridiculous explanations about drones, or, family members coming in for visits and smuggling things. You don't get that kind of supply without the support of custody staff allowing it through.
That's correct.
There's just no other explanation.
The number of cell phones that were in that prison, like, they've got cell phones, they've got chargers, they've got everything that you can possibly imagine that they need to be running that business.
Yeah, I want to see the auntie just chucking all those phones over the fence.
Well, it was great. They did find one guy. He was the guy that was known to be carrying a baseball in his pocket all the time. And why it took them so long to, why are you carrying a baseball? But it opened, and he had stuff in all the time.
Right.
The chow hall is one of the biggest movers. They throw it in their tray and they walk out. You see guys doubling back. But that was another, they don't have anybody out monitoring the streets. They have people in towers, but they don't have anybody out monitoring the streets when guys are going to chow. They're sending people out of the cell units, and, they're going to chow. Guys will end up in other units. Guys ended up in our building. Guys ended up down in our department that were supposed to be at the chow hall, which was, a pretty decent walk away. And, we would call and say, hey, your guy is over here in our building. Did they care? Absolutely not.
Yeah. No one's denying that these other methods for, trafficking occur. Sure. But they can't possibly account for the amount of drugs that are being used in order to sustain daily habits. The only way you get that much product is with custody staff turning a blind eye to the movement of the substance from the outside to the inside. We just have to acknowledge that as a reality.
Absolutely. There's no, we witnessed, staff was getting arrested. They're bringing in weed, they're bringing in cocaine, they're bringing in, in their food, in their lunch that they're bringing in. We're witnessing, and this is, I will put in allegedly, because it was hearsay. Anytime somebody would get arrested, and the stuff that they would say during their interview with the captain before the police came, because police are called, they are arrested at the prison and taken to jail. There was one officer allegedly stated, she kind of was like in their face about it when she went to the captain's office. She's like, you guys, I've already made 20 grand here before you caught me with this weed in my, she's like, I've already made thousands upon thousands of dollars here before you even caught on. They're all working together, and, they're searching each other's bags when they come into Shakedown. Oh, you're good. Go ahead and go through. Well, he's got a bag full of cell phones.
Right.
So that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with. And so then when it comes to the mental health part of it, it's like, we're just banging our heads against a wall, given the fact that 100% of the suicides that happened in 2025, every single one of them tested positive for one or more substances. But we, at the end of the day, were blamed for those suicides.
Talk about movement at ISP.
It's constant and unmonitored.
And this gets back to that theme of chaos.
There were times where if I happen to be up in Shakedown and a new person is coming in, and if you are coming in, you're a new employee and you don't have a badge yet, you are not allowed to walk freely around the facility. You have to be with somebody. And so it wasn't unusual for them to say, hey, Utesch, can you walk this person back? They've got to go to this building. Whatever. Great. Come on, let's go. And it was not unusual at all for the person that I'm walking back, whether it was somebody that was coming to work with us or the medical department or whatever department, to say, wow, like there's a lot of like guys just out walking, like what's going on?
Yeah.
I'm like, nope, that's just...
And while that's normal at ISP, it's not normal for a maximum security prison.
It's not normal at all. It's not normal at all. Like you move when you're told to move. When you are told to go to chow and get your food and go back to your cell, that's what you do at other facilities.
Yeah, there's no like casual loitering.
No.
Like that.
We had radios. We had our radios, and so it was, we would all have our radios on, and during chow time, we can hear the guys up in the tower, guy in the green hat doubling back, guy in the coat doubling back, guy in the blah 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 doubling back, and I'm like, yeah. And they're still not catching them. They're still not getting them. And so it's just this constant back and forth between, and because there's so many of them, it's not a straight line. It's just this giant group of guys just walking all willy-nilly back, from one end of the facility to another.
Yeah.
By themselves.
Right.
Unmonitored. And so it's just such a crowd. And there's nobody, like I said, how many times would I call a cell house and be like, yeah, your guy is over here, not supposed to be over here. You weren't allowed to be in our building without a pass. They didn't have a pass. And, what do you want me to do about it? Was something I heard so many times.
Yeah. And things are just, I just think about RDC. Things were not like that at the RDC. Like if there was a group of people moving, they were in a line. Mm-hmm. They were supervised with custody staff. Mm-hmm. There weren't just like strays, just like wandering around.
No.
Like it's a maximum security prison. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so the question then becomes, why is that happening at ISP?
It's very useful for them.
Right. And this goes back to the chaos exists, and it's not just some organic development that just kind of happens, and it's not some quirk. It is a feature of the system there, not a bug of the system. It goes back to a military tactic of, burying the signal in noise, right? You can sort of get your sort of intelligence communicate through if you bury it in a lot of other random sounds and noise that someone's not going to be able to pick up on, because you basically overwhelm sort of the retrieval of communication, right? So they're not going to pick out everything, so they're going to have to grab onto a few things, not everything. Same thing. If you have people, custody staff who maybe collude with inmates in order to move drugs throughout the system, what's the best way of facilitating that movement? Well, you just throw in a whole lot of other movement.
Yeah.
So that, it doesn't look odd that this one person is wandering and maybe dropping something off or handing something off to somebody else, because there's a dozen other people just wandering around doing something very similar. Mm-hmm. It's a way of camouflaging discrete action.
Absolutely.
Right. And so it gets back to that idea that the chaos that you're witnessing is really just one of the systems that facilitate a criminal enterprise of drug trafficking and movement between inmates and custody staff that simply has to exist in order to account for the amount of drugs saturated in that particular prison.
On days where we had, if we were on break, or, if we just needed, take a time out for a little bit, and we would go stand in front of our building that faced a cell house unit. We're just go outside, get some air. It was kind of fun, because if the guys are going by and they're going to chow, like they see us standing out there, we're talking to them, like we're interacting, they're saying hi, but we're facing a cell house and where there are officers that are, supposed to be monitoring the people coming in and out. If their unit is out at chow, they're supposed to be monitoring them coming back in and making sure they get back in the building and they're not just passing by. Mm-hmm. And there's guys that are standing out in front of the unit, and we're watching the officers just, they're like, oh, they're just talking to each other, or they're talking, they're wandering in and out or whatever. And one instance, we're watching this inmate that's like just kind of chilling, leaned up against the building, and he's just watching everybody go by. Every once in a while, another individual would come up and talk to him. Another inmate would come up and talk to him, and then walk away. And then we saw the pass. We saw them pass from hand to hand, and then the guy just walked away, and I'm looking at the officer. I'm like, you realize that you have trafficking going on 3 feet from you. And
they know.
He's like, oh, well.
They know.
They know. And oh God. And okay, does that go on in prisons? Absolutely it does. But then when you've got suicides happening and all of them are testing positive for these drugs that are playing a major part in the suicide, you can't look at us.
Right. And that gets back to this idea of another sort of aspect of the chaos that happens, right? People on suicide watch have to be monitored very closely.
Yeah.
And that happens in a well-functioning prison, right? It doesn't happen well in a prison where a whole lot of free movement is designed to mask the trafficking of drugs throughout the entire system. A lot of people are out of place. They're not where there should be. So not only are you facilitating a system in which drugs are getting to people so that they can overdose and kill themselves or be killed by others, right? But also the very mechanisms that are designed to sort of protect people are also not in place.
Correct.
Because like pinball machines, all of these balls are just moving around in different directions, right? Instead of actually being in place, doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And there's proof of that, given that, 2 of the suicides happened with staff present.
And then when the deaths do occur, right, which they will inevitably occur when you have such a systemic breakdown in, custody staff, in security, in discipline, they're not going to take the blame themselves.
No. Whose
fault is that then? Well, it has to be the outside contractor's fault.
Yeah, they need that scapegoat.
Right.
We were never acknowledged for anything. We were never, we had so many, once the suicides really started amping up and we were going through a lot. These are our patients. These are the people that we're dealing with all the time. We're doing everything in our power. We're doing everything that we can, that we're permitted to do within our scope. We can't control what custody is doing. We can't control what other inmates are doing. We can't control all of that, but we can control what we are doing as a department. And so I made sure that the Suicide Watch companions, I was not messing with them. They had a staff member. He was a unit manager that was their coordinator. That is who they were to answer to. But more times than not, they would come to me. I was not playing with them. If you guys are if I saw them getting up and walking around and not paying attention, you're gone. You're done. You've been warned. You've been told. You've been trained. You're not to be up walking around. You're not to be ignoring them, because all it takes is one, like the one suicide that happened with everybody present, all it took him was 3 minutes. It took him 3 minutes to do what he did, and he was gone by the time anybody noticed that he was gone. So I wasn't playing, and so we had that in place, making sure that they're well trained. Any time that the orders were disobeyed, or disregarded completely by custody staff, we were on the phone screaming about it. We're screaming to their higher ups. We're screaming to them. We put out orders for a reason. This is what our orders say. They're very clear. They're not complicated to read. This is what they're not allowed. This is what they are allowed. If we come in and there's the stuff that they're not allowed in, we're reporting it. I proposed, in-service training, the annual in-service that everybody in the facility has to go through every year. I wanted to get in there and be a part of it and be like, all right, all of this is happening. I need to know where you guys stand with Suicide Watch, and I want to let you know where we stand, because we need to be on the same page to stop this. I ran it up the chain. Our HSA, our major and warden all approved it. Yes, get in there and do that. Yes, get in there with the training. Yes, all of that. And I was doing that.
Before you move forward, tell people what an HSA is.
Health Services Administrator. So essentially, she was kind of like in-house HR, but she oversaw all of our healthcare departments. So nothing happened in any of the departments without her knowledge. And so, I ran it up the chain. Everybody approved. I put together a curriculum. This is what's happening. I would be fair in saying that 80% of the custody staff that I talked to had no idea that we'd even had so many deaths happen in the prison. They didn't know what our role fully was they know that we put people on suicide watch, but they didn't know what the whole process was. They didn't know what their role, custody staff's role, was in somebody who was on suicide watch. So there was a lot of education, a lot of communication, a lot of just kind of like mending those open, like just those open spots where like there was no communication, there was no knowledge of what was happening. So I was trying to bring those together and mend those, and so we didn't have as many holes. And,
to the extent that there are like cliques and enclaves, right? You can even have almost competitive animosity or disregard for someone else's participation. What you're effectively trying to do is to get the entire facility, the staff, to function as one sort of organism, right?
Yeah.
One functional whole, not separated pieces that don't really operate or cooperate well together.
We were finding out. I was finding out when I would go and do it, like where the biggest issues were, who the biggest issues were. And so there was one training session where I had a captain who just completely shredded me throughout the whole session. Shredded me. Everything that I was putting out there, and I'm not putting stuff out there, stuff that we're making up. We don't go in and make up stuff and be like, this is how we do suicide watch because we said so. This is policy that's in writing. Okay, this is all goes through central office. This is all state. This is all, everybody's aware of how we function, and we function according to policy. And he said, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. I've never had a death on my shift, and I'm not going to. And so I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't give a shit what you say. And just screaming and screaming. And so every time I would try and get another word out, he would start another big, he had, there were other officers in the class that were trying to kind of, smooth things over and like, all right, everybody just calm down, and he wasn't having it. And so I never got to finish because he just completely, I have never in my life seen a grown man act so childish and be so, he had no idea what he was doing. He didn't care. I'll go as far to say that it was very difficult for him. I think there was a cultural issue going on, hearing it from a woman, not having it. And so I went to the major and I said, this is the issue that I dealt with. And the major was like, what do you want me to do? And I said, what do you mean? Like, I'm trying to get everybody on the same page. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you know how he is. Well, and therein lies. Yeah.
Well, getting everybody on the same page would necessarily be a threat to a system that operates on chaotic movement and action, right? So once you systematize and put in place uniform policies and procedures that guide movement and operations, well, now the strays would stand out, right?
Yes.
And so the signal could not be buried in the noise anymore.
Exactly.
Right. So you faced resistance by people who may have been benefiting from the presence of all that noise.
Yeah, you're not going to come in and mess up the system that I've had in place for so many years and take away how I've been benefiting from it. He doesn't mean anything to me, so I was doing my best. I did have another. We were referred to as, our title there was MHP, mental health professional, and I had another MHP in training with me, so he was able to witness it and was in complete and total disbelief and didn't really know what to say. Just the fact that it was happening, and like just all the officers, and I heard after the fact from another officer that had been present, I wanted to jump in and kind of put him in his place and tell him to stop and whatever, but I can't do that because he's my captain. So I would pay for that. He would take that out on me.
Right. So even if there are, ethical staff who want to do the right thing, they're in a culture that disincentivizes them stepping out and advocating for the right thing. Yeah,
the majority of officers and there were all kind, like on every level in that class, captains, sergeants. They had people from I&I, they had K9, and a lot of them, we were telling them the issues that we were having, and I had 2 pages of stuff that we had been dealing with for 2 years that we had been reporting time and time and time again that had never been addressed. And so I said, so when I told them, I said, I have these issues. I said, I will share them with you now, and as the issues are addressed and taken care of, I will delete them from the list. And never once was I able to delete any of those issues from the list because they were never addressed. And so it just was a very frustrating. So, okay, I'm going to continue to do the in-service training. We're going to continue to interact as best we can with administration and our HSA and whoever else, central office, state, whoever we could communicate with and be like, this is what we're dealing with. We created more groups. I myself created 3 more groups, built the curriculums for 3 more groups to help these guys with grief and loss, anger management. I did an interpersonal communications group. I did, and then we have a facility outside of ISP called ISO that are the lower level incarcerated individuals who had never had groups over there. We proposed 3 groups to them and sent out a survey. Are you guys interested in doing groups? And we got pretty much 100% of them back saying, yes, please, we need them. And we got an overwhelming response from them, and never got a chance to do them because of everything that happened toward the end there.